I would love to interview him, and I can't do it in Ukraine. I think I would be arrested there. I'm not really afraid. I mean, at this point, my kids are around. I'm not really afraid of much. I don't think I should go to Ukraine, though. So I'm not going to do that. But I would love to interview Zelensky. He's turned us down. Avenatti's in prison for many years. We did just visit Julian Assange in prison. So I've interviewed people in prison before, but I don't know if he would sign off on us visiting. We've got a bunch of interviews coming, but you're totally right. And Stelter, that's a tough call. I mean, first of all, I don't want to be in the same room as Stelter. There's something very poisonous about that guy and kind of feline and scary. Alex Jones was absolutely right about Brian Stelter. It's not just that he's wrong. It's that there's a lot of malice in Brian Stelter, a lot of things are repressed in Brian Stelter, but a lot of repressed rage and hatred. And he's a destroyer. I agree with that. But I probably talked to him by remote.
It feels like there's so much malice just in the media in general. I mean, you are one of the people that really, you created Rachel Maddow, right? You brought her on. You gave her a platform. You've worked with Joe Scarborough. You used to work for, some pretty prominent figures in conservatism that have, lost their minds. What's going on there? How'd that malice come about?
I don't know. I suspect it's personal. I mean, I really think your politics grow out of whatever is inside you. And in the case of Joe Scarborough specifically, I mean, I knew him really well, and I always admired his intelligence. He's genuinely smart. He's not stupid at all. Very clever guy, very calculating guy. But I think the burden of things that Joe has done, and I'm not just talking about the murder he's been accused of. I have my views on that. I don't know whether he actually committed it or not. He's been credibly accused of killing a girl. However, I don't know if it's that or some things in his personal life, but whatever it is, that is a hater. He's really transformed from a kind of thoughtful, clever, funny guy who had views to a guy who's just bent on destroying other people. And I think that grows out of the misery inside and the guilt that he feels over the things that he's done in his life, et cetera. And a much healthier way to deal with that, I mean, all of us have done things we feel guilty about, I certainly have, is to admit them and kind of let them fall away, let the guilt fall away, and just move forward as a whole person. But someone like Scarborough just can't do it. And it's bad for the country when people like that have national platforms, I think.
Do you think he's sort of doing become a Democrat spokesperson because there's actually a lot less accountability if you're doing the bidding of the left? I mean, it feels like if you're a conservative, Tucker Carlson, if you were an academic, would not be getting the same treatment at Harvard as Claudine Gay is at Harvard for the same thing, for the same gross incompetence, for plagiarism, et cetera. I mean, is there a life jacket to doing the bidding of the radical left today?
There's no doubt about it, but I think it's bigger than partisan. I mean, it's not just that Scarborough is a defender of the Democratic Party, which obviously he is, that whole channel is, but it's more than that. He's an advocate for destroying things, for destroying families, individuals. I mean, if you're arguing for castrating kids or for appointing like a flagrant moron like Claudine Gay to the presidency of Harvard, the most famous, prestigious university in the world, what are you doing? Well, you're wrecking things. You're breaking things that you didn't build. You are advocating for destruction. If you're pushing some totally pointless foreign war like the war in Ukraine that Ukraine cannot win, then the only real effect is the total destruction of that country and an entire generation of men. And if you're quarterbacking that, even in the face of the dead certain knowledge it won't work, but you're still calling for more Ukrainians to die, what are you doing? Well, of course, you're serving evil. You're serving the destruction of other people and of institutions that were worth having but are now gone. And that's kind of where Joe finds himself. So I think it's deeper than partisan. I think there's something spiritual going on here.
What about Bill Kristol? I mean, you started off, working for him, and he's taken that same approach. But I mean, this is someone that at least at a time would have been a noted conservative scholar. It feels like he's literally, a full-blown, not even like, Kennedy-type Democrat. He's a full-blown radical, Marxist.
He is. And what's interesting about Kristol, he's very much like Claudine Gay. And both are the beneficiaries of affirmative action. Both occupy places they haven't earned and have reputations they didn't earn. And neither one is a scholar. Both are kind of midwits. I mean, Kristol's above average intelligence, certainly not a genius, but neither one of them has ever written a book. Bill Kristol is a scholar. He's a PhD from Harvard, but he's never written a single book. And he's not a good writer. I mean, he had a column for the New York Times, which they canceled because he couldn't write a 750-word column twice a week. So he's not that bright. He's kind of dumb. I mean, he's smarter than most people probably, but he's hardly a genius. He's hardly a scholar. His whole life is a pose. And he's really angry about it. I mean, if you take someone and put him in a position he hasn't earned, he got there because of his dad, of course, Irving Kristol. He was the son of a famous guy. And you put him into this position and you give him accolades he hasn't earned, he knows that. And so he feels bad about himself and he takes that rage out on other people. And so Kristol doesn't really, I mean, I worked for him for 5.5 years, so I know what he's like. Yeah. And he's a hater, and he absolutely hates Christian conservatives for sure, above all. And once you understand that, you can kind of see what this is really about. It's not about conservatism or helping America. It's about crushing and suppressing certain people because of their religious faith and their ethnicity. That's what he's really about.
Okay, so as someone who perhaps sits in a similar situation, right? I have a father that's incredibly accomplished. He's done things in all sorts of walks of life. How would you view, what's your analysis of me as being different than that? Because you've seen that can destroy certain people. So is my, when I go out there and fight for all these things, I'm curious to see what the Tucker analysis is on that one.
You want an honest analysis? I'll give it seriously. To you. So you were born into a family that was famous for business, okay, and had a company with your name on it. Be pretty easy to stay with that. And that's probably not a good thing, actually. I mean, if you're really into it and really great at it, do it. But you did something that is your salvation and the salvation of all of us, which is you followed your gifts and your actual enthusiasms. You're like, the two things I love politics and I love the outdoors. I love hunting and fishing. And you decided to master those, and you had a natural aptitude for it. You left a more comfortable path, which was kind of guaranteed because literally your name's on the company. And you're like, I'm going to go into this thing I've never done before, but I just love it. Your dad runs for president. You get hauled out as a surrogate. You don't have a ton of experience in it. You're like, wow, this just feels right. I'm really passionate. And that's why you're like a normal person who's not controlled by your insecurities. As distinct from someone like Claudine Gay, who's like, oh shit, I'm the president of Harvard. I'm not very smart. And she knows she's an imposter. Same with Bill Kristol. You're like, no, I love this. It's like
it's interesting.
And people can feel it on you.
People, like, well, it's so brutal, all the investigations. I was like, no. I got a chance to sort of remake myself in my late 30s. Not everyone gets that chance. Yes. So it is unique. And it was sort of like as brutal as it's been, as costly as it's been. It was definitely easier being the son of a beloved billionaire in New York City, right? You go to all the cool people parties.
Exactly.
That was easy.
Exactly.
This is harder, but it's much more meaningful.
But you genuinely like it. So that's the key. If you take a man and you force him down a path he's not suited for and that he doesn't really love, you'll destroy that man. Mm-hmm. You got to do things. And we were talking off air in your personal life, like you're deeply committed to your non-professional interests, like you really love them. And that's another sign of balance and health, is someone who's not only about his job, who cares about other things like his family, or in your case, hunting and fishing. And I share those loves, so I know it. But it could be anything. It could be you're a secret watercolorist, or you love to sing opera, or whatever. As long as it's real, as long as it's your actual passion and ability, then you'll make it. You'll survive. You won't be distorted. But Bill Kristol, he's posing as a writer. He literally can't write. Like, imagine the hell of that.
That's got to be pretty brutal. I mean, I'm not a writer, but I got a couple of bestsellers, so I guess I'm doing better than Bill Kristol.
Yes, you are.
So you've transcended, it's not just politics anymore. You're dealing with businessmen. You're dealing with pop culture. You've figured out how to meld all of those things together. So, who's the smartest of all the people that you've sat down with? Who's that smartest business person, politician, whatever it may be that you've interacted with? And then conversely, who's the dumbest that, people may not think would be dumb?
That's such a great question. I've been thinking a lot about this. So I grew up like you in an affluent zip code and lived in one my whole life until a few years ago, lived in DC for 35 years. And there's this massive premium on IQ. You're smart. That's like the highest compliment you can pay a person. He's smart. And I really have come to see the limitations in that. I think IQ matters and it's real and it's mostly hereditary. That's all true. However, that's not really the measure of a man, both morally or in the marketplace even. The most successful businessmen I know are not the ones who had the highest scores in the SAT. They're the wisest. Wisdom is the goal, not intelligence, wisdom. There are an infinite number of possibilities in front of you. Which do you choose? That can't be calculated by a McKinsey formula. You can't call BSG to figure that out for you. You need to know it on a gut level, and you need to obey what you know. You need to follow your own instincts. And so the really good one, I mean, Dana White comes to mind as one of them. Is Dana White, did he get a higher score in the SAT than, I don't know, pick your corporate chieftain? Probably not. Yeah. But as Mike Tyson famously said, everybody got a plan until you get hit in the face. And when Dana White got hit in the face during COVID, he zagged when everyone else zigged. He went in the opposite direction. But you can't do that. And he's like, no, I have to do this. And he did it. And it made his sport predominant. It's when the crisis hits. Yeah. That's when you know who somebody is. All the rest of it is just bullshit. All the rest of it is just the product of some meeting where smart people got together to play in the future. And none of it means a thing. It's only when there's a true crisis, like someone leaks your Access Hollywood video or COVID hits or whatever. How do you behave then? And so those are the guys I respect a lot.
Who are the dumbest?
Oh, I mean, the guys who run AB, I would say, have to be, basically the people who run General Motors. Are you joking? It's like, oh, we're not going to sell you trucks anymore that run on gasoline or diesel. Like, are you kidding? That's your whole business. Like anyone who gets talked into something insane. And I will say, my father used to say this when we were kids. He would say all the really bad ideas come from the geniuses. Because they're so counterintuitive, they're so against nature, they're so against the natural order and what's obvious that you really need to be an intellectual to fall for them. And so hey, I have an idea. Let's get rid of money and reorganize the society on an agrarian basis and murder everyone who wears eyeglasses. That was the Khmer Rouge program. But it wasn't conceived by peasants. It was conceived by school teachers and intellectuals. The smartest people in Cambodia came up with the killing fields. Of course, the peasants never would have come up with something like that. They'd be like, well, some people need eyeglasses. They never could have convinced themselves of something that dumb.
Well, no, I mean that's manifesting itself so much right now, where you see sort of the illusion of academia at Harvard. You realize well, no, everything's a DEI program. You can't get in there. The feeling I had for my Penn and Wharton diploma, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And it's something 10 years ago I would have been proud of. Today you realize we even had a saying back then. B is for billionaire, because you're right. The guys they figured out a system did a lot better than the guys that were so brilliant. They got A's and everything, but they never really. They were always trapped within that. And you talk about this sort of general thing where, the fake white collar economy, right? COVID lockdowns sort of exposed it more than ever. And, when your whole job is reduced down to, sitting in your bed in your boxer shorts, unlike a couple of people maybe pleasuring themselves on conference calls, former colleagues of yours and, competitors in the media space, what's going on with that? It's sort of a reality check when we realize what's happening in our lives, in corporate America. We have fake email jobs that don't really matter. You've talked about this a lot, but I think it has a drastic effect on losing the sense of meaning and purpose that is such a big part of people's day-to-day life. How do you see what's going on there right now?
Well, I think it's all, fruit from the same tree. It's all the product of generational affluence. And you see this in families, most obviously. There's the innovator, the hard worker, the bootstrap guy who creates the business, makes the family fortune, and then the family becomes successively less impressive with every generation. And I have to say, since you invited it, you asked me to analyze you and your family.
I'm in.
Looking back, the best thing that ever happened to your family probably was the suffering that you've gone through, the loss of money that you guys have gone through in the last 5 years. That gives you purpose and gives you meaning and sharpens you and makes you live a purposeful life because you have no choice. If that doesn't happen, if you just live off trust disbursements every month, and I've seen this frankly in my own family, but I've seen it in many other families, you become contemptible. And you become weak and silly and ridiculous, and you don't even know it. And in the end, you become self-destructive. And that is the story of rich families. The fourth generation are always killing themselves, you know what I mean, with alcoholism or whatever, literally shooting themselves. So that's true in countries as well. And so if you have 80 years of uninterrupted economic growth and prosperity, which is the story of America after 1945, then of course you're going to get to a place where the entire ruling class is so decadent and silly and can't see themselves clearly enough to know that it's going to come tumbling down. Yeah. I mean, it's that strong men make good times aphorism is actually real. And I'm just sorry that my children have to live in the middle of it. I kind of like the world I grew up in.
But you broke out of it. I mean, you and I are that way as well, right? You grew up in your father was like an ambassador and high up in the government and did these things. You grew up in a DC sort of environment around that, just like I grew up. I'm supposed to go to Penn and, graduate from Wharton and be a liberal in New York City, go to the rich people parties. And yet, I mean, I guess we sort of both broke out of that. We had personas that were very different than that in our real lives. What made you sort of go counterculture to sort of, your predetermined destiny that should have happened and sort of engulfs 95% of probably the kids that we grew up with?
Well, I mean, two things. One was just temperamental, like I'm just too arrogant or something. I just didn't want to have to repeat the slogans. I want to say what I think is true. I don't have to say everything I think is true. I don't have the need to spill all my thoughts, some of which are stupid and crazy probably. But I didn't want to have to repeat someone else's bumper sticker. And over time, I just wouldn't. I'm not doing that. Okay, so that was the first thing. And the second thing, which is even more transformative, is I realized that the world that these people were aspiring to or occupying wasn't that great, actually. Yeah. And I didn't
highly overrated.
It's so overrated. How much room service can you eat? How many weeks can you spend in St. Bart's? Is flying private really that awesome? It's fine. It's not that great, actually. And what I really loved, and speaking for myself, was nature. Yeah. I mean this from my heart. I would be a lot happier in a cabin, which I have, with no electricity or running water, than I would be at the Four Seasons fill in the blank exotic destination. I just really felt that way. I appreciated the beauty of the natural world far more than I appreciated the trappings of wealth. And so you realize the thing that everybody wants in the end, it's better than grinding poverty. It's better than being in debt.
Oh, of course.
I think, of course. But it's not that great, and it's not salvation. And for me, what really was salvation, this sounds cheesy, but I really mean it, was to be fishing with my kids on a stream with no one else around. That was the highest level for me, and remains, or bird hunting with my dogs, who I really, really love. And I see my dogs working in this weird ballet in the quail field, and I'm I don't think I've ever been happier. So once you decide that that's what you want, then none of this other shit means anything at all. Yeah. It's what are you going to give me to obey? I don't want what you have, actually. Yeah. And I mean it.
That resonates so much with me, because that was in 15, they're they stuck me sort of out in the political field. I'm in Iowa. I don't even know what a caucus is. And they're well, how are you doing well with regular people? It's well, contrary to popular belief, I'm not on the rubber chicken dinner circuit in New York. On Friday afternoon, I'm at my farm in Pennsylvania. My friends were at just regular blue collar guys. So it wasn't I'm telling them what they want to hear. These are actually my friends. And that's what was so disappointing about perhaps the disappointing part of the political process was figuring out the people chosen to represent these people that live in their neighborhoods, whether it's Congress or otherwise. They were incapable of talking to their neighbors. And the son of a billionaire from New York somehow had it figured out simply because he actually spent time there. And that created a whole new level of cynicism that really created a rage, which probably makes me fight the way I do as well.
Well, I think you have a huge advantage, and I feel this way to some extent. If you're not insecure about your social status, if you're not trying to, get super rich or get the accolades, if you've already kind of seen that a little bit and decided it's not that great, then they don't have a leash on you, actually, at that point. Again, I want to be clear. I'm not, I don't want to be in debt again. I have been. I don't want that, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to be poor, actually, but I'm not that afraid of it. And I know that I don't want whatever they have to give as a prize for obedience. I'm just not interested. And that's a huge advantage. And I think, honestly, your father has that as well. I mean, the true reformers are not coming from the bottom up. They're coming from the top down, because they know how the system works. They're not that impressed by it. They know who's fake and who's not. And they know in the end, the prize isn't worth having.
Yeah. So, as you talk about this, I mean, it sort of feels like we see a lot of that in news coverage, right? How different do you think our news would be? And I think this is something you're trying to do. It certainly is something, I'm trying to do, just having these conversations, getting it out there in a different way. if all of the major networks weren't simply, clustered in New York and D.C.? I mean, we talk about those bubbles, but, what would it be like if those guys were actually sort of spread out throughout the country?
I think it might make a difference, but the main thing that would make a difference is the people in the business, because they determine what the institution is like. I mean, an institution is just a bunch of people with a common purpose. And in the news business, the two qualities that I look for, well, really three. First is honesty. You have to be honest, period. Okay. In your personal life as well as your professional life. Second, you have to be curious. You really have to wonder, like, well, wait a second, what was that? And the beauty of, being in nature is that it inspires your curiosity. Like, how do I catch the trout? How do I find the quail? Whatever. Like, you're trained to be interested in the things around you. Okay. Journalists have to have that quality. And the third quality is you cannot be impressed by power or rank or merit badge. If you're talking to someone who's got authority over you and he's got some title, whether it's general or ambassador or president or whatever, if you instinctively genuflect before that, if you bow before him just by your nature, this is not the business for you. You have to remember, I'm a free man. I'm a citizen. I'm a moral equal to the person I'm interviewing. I'm not hostile necessarily, but I'm approaching him as an equal, as a peer. You may have been elected. You may run the Pacific Fleet or whatever, but I'm an American too. And I respectfully demand an answer on behalf of my fellow Americans. You have to have that attitude. And if inside you're a bitch, if you're a beta, if you're subordinate in your heart, and you're like, well, I can't ask the general that question. He's got an aircraft carrier, or he's got a division and I don't. Yeah. Then you're not right for this job at all. Then go be his aide, go be his coffee bearer, but you can't be a journalist. And those three qualities are totally absent in our media. It's not that they're not smart enough. They all went to Cornell. I think that's technically an Ivy League school, or was anyway at one point. But no, they're smart enough, but they don't have the temperamental qualities. They're all socially anxious and insecure. They want to be accepted by the people they interview. And
they looked at 2016 as an anomaly. They weren't willing to do a post-mortem of maybe there's something wrong with the way we're looking at things, or maybe we're not looking at things at all. And I think that goes across the board. I mean, you recently said, America became a fundamentally different country the moment that Mar-a-Lago got raided. Both in the media, there was silence. In law enforcement, everyone, this is totally normal. Can you expand on that? Because I do think you're right. That was a sort of a turning point in discourse, but it was also a sort of a flipping of a switch, I think, for a lot of Americans who are finally realizing that everything that they've been told about their country, everything that they've been told they must believe, or they're not a patriot, so much of that is based on a total lie at this point.
I completely agree. I mean, that was the moment that changed my view of everything. And I happened to be out of the country when that happened with my kids. I used to get a week in the summer and a week at Christmas, and that was the week in Mongolia. Mongolia. Hey, well, I'm not going to tell you where I was, but I was, I was with my kids in totally isolated place. And I had been my son works in politics. So I've been talking, he's very smart. So I've been talking to my son about this stuff and like, what's going to happen? Is Trump really going to run? Is that real? I'm asking him. And I don't know I don't know. The next day he comes to me and he's reading on his phone. He's like, they just did this at Mar-a-Lago. And I said, this will destroy, this is the thing that will actually destroy the country. You want to end democracy, all this, pearl clutching about democracy. If you want to end democracy, this is what you do. And of course, because we're from Washington and we understand, my dad worked in government, I've been around it my whole life. I understand the classification system and I know what a scam it is. Over 1 billion classified documents. So it's not a democracy by definition. If you can't see what your government is doing, you're not really in charge of your government, are you? No, of course not. And so the fact that they got him on a classification charge was so mind-boggling to me because I know how it works very, very well. I was just stunned. And my first thought was, and I happen to like Trump, as you know, and I agree with him on 90% of his views on things. So I'm aligned already ideologically. But even if I weren't, I mean, even if he was saying things that I really didn't like, I'd still, in fact, even if I hated him, which I don't, but I would still be like, no, you can't have that. My kids live here. My grandkids are going to live here. We want to live here anyway. We have nowhere else to go. You can't wreck our system. You didn't create it. My family's been here hundreds of years. So I kind of feel like, sorry to say it, but a little bit of ownership of it. No, this is our country. Stop that. You can't do that. Yeah. And we will end the country if we don't have free and fair elections and a fair justice system. Those are the two prerequisites above all else. That's why people come here. It's not for our financial system and all the Wall Street jerk-offs compliment themselves like, oh, people come here for a banking system. No, they don't. Yeah. There are lots of banking systems. They come here because of the rule of law and the fact that there's a peaceful transition of power. And the only reason it's peaceful is because the population, by and large, thinks it's fair. So it is actually a system that the whole population buys into. That's why it's enduring. That's why we don't have revolutions. And the second you end that, we will have a revolution. Maybe not now, but at some point. If you take people's power away entirely, no economic power, no political power, they will revolt. So you can either put them all in concentration camps or you can prepare to be overthrown. That really is the story of history. So I'm like,
well, but they seem to be trying to do that right now, right? I mean, if you look at the January 6th treatment relative to the Summer of Love riot treatment, you know, Democrats are always, they're out there shouting about protecting democracy and norms, but they're out there also trying to imprison their political opponents. They're trying to censor everyone that they disagree with. You know, what is it with the left and projection?
Well, I mean, that's, I've thought an awful lot about this, and I'm slow to pick up on anything. I mean, it takes me forever to know anything. Like the obvious often eludes me. I think one of my favorite employees is gay, and I love him, and that we've worked together for all these years. I had no idea he was gay for like 3 months, and I said to someone else, "Is he gay?" Yeah, he's married.
Because who cares? Yeah, only the left actually cares, right? They pretend that you're not supposed to care, but if you don't care, that's a problem.
Like the stuff that's so obvious. Exactly. So, but the point is, this started to happen, and I didn't get it at first. I was like, wait, what they're saying is not simply false. It is the exact opposite. It's the mirror image. It's the inverse of the truth. And not only that, they're accusing me of doing exactly what they are doing. And what is that? And I've decided after many years of watching this that it's evil. That's not dishonesty in the way that normal people lie. That's like a true deception, like you were serving not just the individual lie, but the concept and the force of evil when you do that. I mean, that's like really super dark. And that has awakened in me the sense that something else bigger than politics is going on here. And of course, I'm the last person to really know what it is. I've been an Episcopalian my whole life, but I am totally convinced that something bigger than politics is afoot, not just in this country, but across the West. Yeah. And it makes me feel like I'm not sitting this out, and I am not, to the extent I have any control over anything, very limited, but for my part, I'm not going to stop yelping about this prosecution of the presidential frontrunner, because if that is allowed to happen, we're done. We're done. Yeah. Like there are no more elections after that. Sorry.
Yeah, they're not even pretending, anymore. Now, I know that you don't drink, and you've been sober for quite some time right now. What has sobriety taught you? Do you view the world differently from that perspective? Should more people, try that out? What are your thoughts on that? Because it feels like a big one. It's something I've dealt with myself.
I think it's the key, and I didn't understand it, again, just to say for the third time. It takes me a long time to understand things, but so I got sober because I had no choice, because I was drinking in the morning and I would have destroyed my life, right? So I quit 21 years ago, and the immediate, I know you know this feeling, is waking up on Sunday feeling okay and not hungover and not worried about what you did and all that stuff. So nice. That's like an amazing experience. Yeah. But it took me a long time to understand that's not the real benefit. The real benefit of being sober all the time is that it makes you strong. You're much less afraid. The second you get loaded, you're afraid. There's something about it being impaired that makes you fearful and protective. But when you live for a while, totally exposed to the world with no kind of shield of drugs or alcohol to protect you, you become a lot stronger inside, a lot stronger, a lot harder to rattle, a lot harder to intimidate. You become a lot tougher as a person in a really good way, not in a mean way, but in a real way. Like, I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I do think that's the key. I think it's the reason that the U.S. government, as a matter of policy, pushes people to be loaded.
What do you think about weed with that? Like, you can't walk around a major city in New York without just literally smelling, weed all over the place. Is it the same? Is it part of the...
They hate cigarettes, but they love weed. Yeah. I mean, by the way, just to be clear, I don't think we should haul people off to prison for firing up the bomb in their living room. I don't. Of course not. However, the government is affirmatively pushing weed on the population. Now, why are they doing that? to weaken them, obviously. It doesn't make you stronger, it makes you weaker, of course. That's why they closed the gyms during COVID, but kept the weed dispensaries
Physical
open.
Fitness is white supremacy, Tucker. I mean, if you're in shape, if you can run a 6-minute mile, if you can do a couple pull-ups, and you actually strive to do that, that's not just, perseverance or basic, common health benefit. That's actually white supremacy these days. And they sold it to us hard. Right. I mean, Starbucks will remain open. Walmart and junk food places will remain open, but we're going to close your gym.
It's totally true, and feed you garbage, poison food, which is also true. And that I mean, I'm not to get into my boring life, but that's been one of the things that's taken me the longest to understand, since I have such bad eating habits and such low taste in food. I love white, even though I grew up in a rich world, I love white trash food. And it's actually poison, and it makes you weak, not just fat. Obviously, it makes you fat, which is bad, I guess. Yeah. I don't even care about fat, however. What I care about is, a person's spiritual condition. Are you strong? And that stuff makes you weak. And so does sitting around, and so does smoking weed, and then the whole just world of pharmacology that they're pushing on people, the SSRIs, the benzodiazepines, all of that weakens you. And they're weakening you for a reason, which is to make you more obedient and easier to control. They don't want free citizens who think for themselves. That's the thing they don't want. And anyone who's like that, they immediately call a white supremacist.
Well, by the way, other than Trump, who remains very strong, despite eating a diet of McDonald's and KFC. I mean, he's the one guy that can pull off, he literally knows every item on the menu. People are like, no, that's not real. I'm like, dude, I've literally driven through the drive-thru in the presidential motorcade of a McDonald's. I promise you, he knows everything there is to know about it.
I love that. I was coming back from hunting, super early in the morning, coming back at like 11, and I've had too much coffee. My stomach's growling. This was a couple of years ago. I don't eat McDonald's at all. And I was like, McDonald's, I'll get a McDonald's. And I had the breakfast thing, which was delicious. It was like a head injury for the rest of the day. It was unbelievable.
Kick your butt. Sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit is incredible, but
that's what I had.
You pay for it forever.
It's insane. And the fact that he can just wolf down a quarter pounder and, a Milky Way and keep, it's like he's obviously got a very unusual constitution. But for most of us, that stuff makes you weaker and easier to control. And last thing I'll say is I don't understand why we don't see that and why we don't understand the implications. If you treated your children like the U.S. government treats its citizens, your kids would be in rehab. They would they'd be moving towards suicide. We are intentionally mistreating and weakening the population, making them more dependent, more self-loathing, less physically healthy. It's absolutely crazy. Again, if you did that to your kids, they would be destroyed. And yet they're doing it to us. And so what does that tell you? They hate us. That's what it tells you. There's no other possible interpretation.
You're right. There's no other plausible even answer at this point. It's so flagrant. It's so obvious. But I think maybe with, all things Trump derangement syndrome, I do think that people are figuring that out. I mean, that's a big meme, but, what they're talking about the physical fitness, we joke about these things, but people are starting to get it. There's a big push. And, the attacks from the government and from the left, radicalizing someone who actually just wants to eat healthy and calling them all sorts of names. I think it's backfiring because it's so ludicrous. There's no justification for it that I think people are waking up to it, albeit slowly.
But yeah, I agree with that. But I think we haven't spent enough time thinking about motive here. Yeah. I mean, one of my kids, for example, I've never lifted a weight in my life. I grew up in a world, where everyone smoked cigarettes, including us at the breakfast table in, 8th grade. So that's a whole different way of thinking to me. But one of my children, decided to get into, all my kids are into physical fitness, but one of them really kind of got into it. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. I don't have a weight set. I don't know anything about that stuff. But I instantly liked it because I recognized, first of all, I love this child more than my own life. And this is a good thing. And so I'm really happy for him. The government has the opposite reaction, and so does the media. They're angry if you try to become a better, stronger, more independent, happier person. That tells you what? They hate you and want to kill you. Yeah. I don't think I'm overstating even a little bit. No. Think about that. The people with all the power want you to die? I mean, whoa, we're in a brand new world. I mean, we need to think about the implications of this for a minute.
Yeah, I've been saying lately to basically everyone, whatever disdain you have for the government, and after what they tried to do to me and continue to try to do to my family, I have a lot. It's not enough. There's no amount at this point that and so hopefully we change that. But Tucker, if you could ask God one question before you die, what would it be?
Oh, I ask a lot of questions of God every day.
It's good. I think we could all use a little bit more of that too, which is another reason they're trying to get rid of that.
Oh, every day. And again, I come from a completely secular background, but I mean, it's just like you have no choice but to realize that it's real. If you think the only things that are real are the things you can see, you're an idiot. Yeah. That stuff is as real as the coffee mug on my desk. It's entirely real. But what question would I ask if I had one? I don't know that I would ask I mean, I'm completely convinced that when we die, all these mysteries will be known to us. So I'm certain of that. For some reason, I know that that's true. And there's so much, I'm not sure I want to know any more than I know, if I'm being totally honest with you. And speaking of religion, I'm always struck by, I'm reading the Bible and I'm not doing any Bible study. I don't trust anyone to interpret it for me. I just want to read it and see what it says. And I was really struck by the Adam and Eve story. So God punishes, he tells Adam and Eve, there's only one thing you can't do. You can't eat from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They do. Famously, they're punished. But it's like, wait, God is punishing them for knowing too much. That is, I never thought of that. It's like the mirror image of what we tell ourselves, that ignorance is the real crime. Ignorance is the crime. No, actually, in the Hebrew Bible, knowledge was the crime. Interesting. They got kicked out of the garden for knowing too much. And I do feel the UFO thing has kind of convinced me of this. I learned a lot about that, too much. Yeah. So much that I actually don't want to talk about it. And I think it's real. I mean, the things that I learned are real. And I've spent my whole life bringing information to people. And I think that's virtuous and I'll continue to do it. But there is a point at which you're like, well, what do I do with that? Yeah. It's not just that UFOs are real. Obviously, they're real. But there's a lot more to it. And it's like, what do I do with that? I don't know. And I kind of wish I didn't know. I'm just being honest with you.
Well, why is that taken so, obviously it's, just play statistics out over the course of the size of the universe. Of course, there's got to be something out there, right? And yet, why does it seem like now, all of a sudden, is that just another shiny object from the government to distract people from what's really going on, from all of the things they're trying to do and or take from us? Well, what's your perspective on how that all of a sudden magically is now actually getting credence? There's sort of tacit acknowledgement even from the government itself. Well, is there more to it than that?
That was my first suspicion. And by the way, I think most things are distractions, of course. I mean, I think the amount of emotional energy Americans spend on conflicts in countries they can't find on maps. Yeah. And you're seeing that a lot now. That is mostly really a psyop designed to get us to ignore what's happening to, we're being invaded, but no one seems to even acknowledge it. So there's that. And yes, and I think UFOs have been used a bunch of different times over the past 80 years to, as a distraction or whatever. But right now, I happen to know for a fact that there's a lot of information. Everyone knows that the U.S. government has these objects and has the quote biologics, whatever these beings were that were flying them, and has them, and they're in the warehouse of a defense contractor, and that's like known, and 10 whistleblowers have attested to that. People can deal with it. People don't even seem to be thinking about it. It's like, yeah, whatever, okay, that's real. That's not the story, actually. And no, they're not from another galaxy. They're from here. And what is that? And yes, the U.S. government's been in contact with them for a long time. And there's a lot of other stuff there that they really are trying to suppress, I happen to know, in meaningful ways. Mm-hmm. And what is that? And the truth is, I'm not exactly sure what this is, but some of the things that I believe are true and based on actual evidence are, to the point where you're like, I'm not really sure what's real anymore. And so maybe it's not fruitful to focus on that stuff. I mean that. Okay, so we know, to speak for myself, I believe certain things are true, okay? Because I've looked into it fairly aggressively. And at the end of that search, I'm like, okay, well, that affects my sleep. Nothing affects my sleep, by the way. That affected my sleep. Yeah. What do I do with this? And I'm in a cul-de-sac. I don't really know. So am I happy that I know this stuff? Not really. Yeah. So I don't, whatever. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, but that's where I am on it.
Oh, so, talk about what you're trying to do right now with the media company. How did your perspective sort of change? I mean, we're talking about, speaking truth and talking about facts. It seems like you started actually speaking truth to power, something everyone keeps talking about, but then whatever went on with Fox News happened. Now you're trying to do something different. I mean, I think Americans are watching the cable news format as being fundamentally broken, right? There's two different sides, but really it's all about power. There's one side, it's the uni party that you so often sort of refer to. What are you trying to do that's different? Is it about a long form? I mean, a conversation like this, and I've been on your show back on the Fox days numerous times, and how many sound bites can I get out in the 3 minutes that I have to get it out there? How broken is that system, and what are you trying to do differently to actually have that intelligent conversation where you can get beyond that, again, the sound bite that's repeated every hour, on the hour, 24 hours a day, regardless of sort of which channel you're watching. And, if someone watches 7 minutes of news these days, I feel like they got it all covered because no one else is saying anything different.
First of all, let me just say you are a natural long form guy. And so I bet you're enjoying the hell out of this because it obviously comes naturally to you. It's way more fun than doing those stupid TV hits. I've been on both sides of that for my whole life. And it's totally fruitless. I don't think it moves the ball at all. And it doesn't make you feel good. It's like prostitution. Maybe you get short-term pay, but it doesn't make you feel good about yourself.
Please tell me your corporately sponsored talking points, and then we'll go to the next person who's going to do exactly the same thing for an hour. And then, we all accomplish nothing and move on.
That's exactly right. It's an electric windmill. It's a treadmill. It doesn't help anybody. But look, clearly things are changing, and it's just partly because of technology, partly because I think most media organizations have so discredited themselves that their core product has no value anymore because no one believes it. Okay, so it's time for a new thing. I think forums like this are hugely important. The podcast world defines what people think. When I was a kid, it was magazines. People read small magazines to know what the cutting edge of thinking about something was. That's all gone, of course. It's been replaced by podcasts, which is so cool to see, and a much more honest way of communicating. But there's also this hole where a news organization should be. So there's so many things going on right now simultaneously. Who's keeping track of all this stuff? And you really need to have employees, send them out to bring people news about how their world is changing. It's changing so fast. It bewilders me, and I do this for a living. Yeah. So that's what we're building. We're building an alternative to existing news organizations. We're using X a lot to promote it and as a forum because it's an amazing forum. Our site is tuckercarlson.com, and there's where we have the meat of it. It's a subscription service for a reason. We could just do ad-based and make enough money. We don't trust advertisers, no offense. Love advertisers, but I've been through this for decades. I know what it looks like. You're at their mercy, and I don't want that. So it has to be a subscription service, hopefully not very expensive, certainly less expensive than a cable subscription, but it can't be influenced. It's free. There are no gatekeepers. It's honest. It can remain honest, and you can't knock it down. Media Matters or Sleeping Giants or Southern Poverty Law Center, all these Soros censorship organizations can't touch a service that has no advertisers. So that's what we're building.
And that's all coming out right now, right? There's the lawsuit that X has, there's the lawsuit that Rumble has. And it's someone's clicking on a link so that they can find an off-color video on a free speech platform. And then they keep clicking the link. So the ad finally shows up. And then they're like, oh, screenshot. This company is advertising on a racist thing. It's oh, my God, it's so crazy. It's been so manipulated. It's so just, algorithmic, but, also predictable watching everything from the left. But it's truly scary. So I love that you sort of get to that point where you are then beyond reproach.
Well, I love that. I mean, you need, especially over the next 12 months, you need to protect yourself. I mean, it's the equivalent of I'm sure every single person watching has had a moment in the last year where he's I probably should buy some canned food for my basement. I mean, all of us can feel the turmoil is ahead, and I hope it's not as bad as I feel like it's going to be. I really pray that. However, everybody feels this need to kind of make sure you got everything in a pile because it could get, it could get real. And that's how I feel about news. It could get real. And so this is a way to protect the news source. No matter what happens, I want to be able to tell people what I think is happening and bring them video of it happening and basically fill the hole, the smoking crater where NBC News and CBS and ABC, the news giants of my youth, used to be, because they're gone, and they've long been gone, actually. It's all fake.
So as a last question, because I know you had a hard out, in his book, You're the Messenger, Roger Ailes, right, back from the Fox days, wrote that if you don't communicate effectively, you won't live as fully as you should, nor will you achieve any personal goals. What makes you the effective communicator that you are, right? You came in, you dominated cable news, you became #1 there, you're able to bring that over. You had and have had, maybe even with my father, maybe the most viewed interview in history. What makes you and gave you that ability to effectively communicate?
Well, I mean, that's just, facility with words was like kind of the only gift that I had. I mean, I was left-handed, right-eye dominant, which totally, it screws you up. It's very unnatural.
It's even worse when you're shooting quail, by the way. Yeah.
Trust me. And I've hunted so much in my life that I can still kill the bird, but it's with a massive disability. I'm super dyslexic. I had all these things that limited me in what I could do really for a living. And the only thing I was sort of natural with was reading and writing, because I love to read and I love to write, and it just came naturally to me. And so I went into that business. But there are a lot of articulate people in television. I mean, that's like a prerequisite. That's like, you're not going to be in a Miss America pageant unless you're hot. Like, that's just kind of the baseline.
No, that's wrong, Tucker. That's wrong now.
Well,
that used to be correct until about 2022. Now, if you're like the fat dude that goes trans, like, you'll win Miss Universe. Like, it's sort of like, if you want to be an admiral today, just check the trans box. If you check a couple, POC boxes, all of a sudden, you too can be an admiral. We'll give you a submarine. Like, you don't have to know anything about submarines. Who cares? You don't have to know how to dive. Just congratulations.
You're so right. You're so right. I'm just caught in the past. I almost said you have to be smart to be president of Harvard. But anyway, yeah. But I do think what helped me was just the mental change. I just decided I didn't want to lie, knowingly or unknowingly. Like, the amount of lies that I have repeated without knowing it is just vast and shameful. And I didn't want that to happen to me anymore. And that, it still happens to me sometimes. Like, you don't know you're being used, but you are. But now I'm like so paranoid about that and so focused on that. Just tell the truth. And by the way, if there's something that you really can't say, then just don't say it. But don't say something that's untrue, period. And I think that my decision to do that, I really did it for myself, not to like save the world or something, just because I don't want to live with myself as a liar.
Well, that makes you so different than all the journalists out there, right? I mean, it feels like literally all of the, the journalists who, democracy dies in darkness, Tucker, they're out there doing the bidding of the Pentagon. It's like, wait a minute. Like, is that true? Or did they give you a Pentagon briefing that's designed for a very specific purpose, right?
Well, in the Pentagon, I'm so glad without getting into names, but I would say the most destructive reporters in the entire American press corps, certainly in Washington, are not the ones who are covering for Joe Biden. You can't cover for a senile man. Everyone knows the truth. It's obvious. They're the ones who are covering for CIA and DOD. And I'm thinking of one in particular who I know personally, who's really like an agent of evil. It was lying on behalf of these vast secretive bureaucracies that are hurting our country every single day, and knowingly doing that. And I just feel like there's an awful lot of that. The number of national security reporters who are honest is like, I don't know any. I mean, maybe on the, fringe independent media there are, and thank God. But in the regular media, they're all captive to those bureaucracies. And it's scary. And Americans, and particularly Republicans, have no idea. Like, Republicans are totally on guard for reporters telling them that maybe Joe Biden's not senile. They're like, oh, you're a liar. Shut up. But when someone comes out, particularly on a trusted news channel that the right watches, and is like, no, the Pentagon reported today that there were gas attacks in Syria, they just believe it. They don't know they're being lied to, which is access, so
right?
scary.
If you don't do their bidding, all of a sudden your access is out. And then, once you don't have that access to them, then you don't bring anything to the table in D.C. anymore. So even though it's been proven over and over and over again that they're lying to you, if you're not doing their bidding, it's even worse because you don't have access even to the misinformation that you're being given that you're supposed to run with.
Totally true. That's totally true. But at a certain point, you get to an age where, and that, by the way, that's true on all beats. And I've been involved in some of them personally, so I've seen it. But at a certain point, you're like, is it worth it? I'm going to lie? Like, I'm a free man. I'm not a slave. Like, I'm an American. I should tell the truth. And I'm going to be judged on this at some point anyway. So, no, I'm not doing that. And yet, they do. And I just couldn't have more contempt for them. I just couldn't. And I don't, whatever. I don't want to say more than that. But I mean, that group of people is really poisonous, and they've really hurt this country. And no one says that. And but it's true.
Well, that's why I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I look forward to everyone checking it out. Watch what Tucker's doing. He's one of the few people that's actually willing to have that honest conversation in media these days. And the faster we start having that conversation, the faster other people start adapting that and spreading it out there. I think the faster we can actually make real change. So I really appreciate you doing what you're doing, Tucker, and the friendship as always. So thank you so much. And everyone, check out what he's doing. I think you're going to really enjoy it.